Chapter 44. Descriptive of an affecting interview between Mr. Samuel Weller and a family party. Mr. Pickwick makes a tour of the diminutive world he inhabits, and resolves to 1009 with it in future as little as possible. A few mornings after his incarceration, Mr. Samuel Weller, having arranged his master's room with all possible care and seen him comfortably seated over his books and papers, withdrew to employ himself for an hour or two to come, as he best could. It was a fine morning, and it occurred to Sam that a pint of porter in the open air would lighten his next quarter of an hour or so, as well as any little amusement in which he could indulge. Having arrived at this conclusion, he betook himself to the tap. Having purchased the beer, and obtained, moreover, the day but one before yesterday's paper, he repaired to the skittle ground, and seating himself on a bench, proceeded to enjoy himself in a very sedate and methodical manner. First of all, he took a refreshing draught of the beer, and then he looked up at a window and bestowed a platonic wink on a young lady who was peeling potatoes thereat. Then he opened the paper and folded it so as to get the police reports outwards, and this being a vexatious and difficult thing to do when there is any wind stirring, he took another draught of the beer when he had accomplished it. Then he read 2 lines of the paper, and stopped short to look at a couple of men who were finishing a game at rackets, which, being concluded, he cried out "Worry good" in an approving manner, and looked round upon the spectators, to ascertain whether their sentiments coincided with his own. This involved the necessity of looking up at the windows also, and as the young lady was still there, it was an act of common politeness to wink again, and to drink to her good health in dumb show, in another draught of the beer, which Sam did. And having frowned hideously upon a small boy who had noted this latter proceeding with open eyes, he threw one leg over the other, and, holding the newspaper in both hands, began to read in real earnest. He had hardly composed himself into the needful state of abstraction, when he thought he heard his own name proclaimed in some distant passage. Nor was he mistaken, for it quickly passed from mouth to mouth, and in a few seconds the air teemed with shouts of Weller. "Here," roared Sam in a stentorian voice. "What's the matter? Who wants him? Has an express come to say that his country house is afire?" "Somebody wants you in the hall," said a man who was standing by. "Just mind that air paper and the pot, old feller, will you?" said Sam. "I'm a common." Blessed if they was a callin' me to the bar, they couldn't make more noise about it. Accompanying these words with a gentle rap on the head of the young gentleman before noticed, who, unconscious of his close vicinity to the person in request, was screaming, "Weller!" With all his might, Sam hastened across the ground and ran up the steps into the hall. Here the first object that met his eyes was his beloved father sitting on a bottom stair, with his hat in his hand, shouting out "Weller!" in his very loudest tone, at half-minute intervals. "What are you a-roarin' at?" said Sam impetuously, when the old gentleman had discharged himself of another shout, "making yourself so precious hot that you looks like a graduated glass blower." "What's the matter?" "Aha," replied the old gentleman, "I began to be afeard that you'd gone for a walk round the Regency Park, Sammy." "Come," said Sam, "none o' them taunts again the wictim o' avarice, and come off that air step. What are you a-set down there for?" "I don't live there." "I've got such a game for you, Sammy," said the elder Mr. Weller, rising. "Stop a minute," said Sam, "you're all vite behind." "That's right, Sammy, rub it off," said Mr. Weller as his son dusted him. "It might look personal here, if a man walked about with whitevash on his clothes, Sammy?" As Mr. Weller exhibited in this place unequivocal symptoms of an approaching fit of chuckling, Sam interposed to stop it. "Keep quiet, do," said Sam. "There never was such a old picter card born. What are you bustin' vith now?" "Sammy," said Mr. Weller, wiping his forehead, "I'm afeard that these days I shall laugh myself into a apoplexy, my boy." "Vell then, what do you do it for?" said Sam. "Now then, what have you got to say?" "Who do you think's come here with me, Samivel?" said Mr. Weller, drawing back a pace or two, pursing up his mouth and extending his eyebrows. "Pell," said Sam. Mr. Weller shook his head, and his red cheeks expanded with the laughter that was endeavoring to find a vent. "Mottled-faced man, P-Raps?" asked Sam. Again, Mr. Weller shook his head. Who then asked Sam? Your mother-in-law, said Mr. Weller, and it was lucky he did say it, or his cheeks must inevitably have cracked from their most unnatural distension. Your mother-in-law, Sammy, said Mr. Weller, and the red-nosed man, my boy, and the red-nosed man. Ho! 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 With this, Mr. Weller launched into convulsions of laughter, while Sam regarded him with a broad grin gradually overspreading his whole countenance. They've come to have a little serious talk with you, Samuel, said Mr. Weller, wiping his eyes. Don't let out nothin' about the unnatural creditor, Sammy. What, don't they know who it is? Inquired Sam. Not a bit on it, replied his father. Veer are they, said Sam, reciprocating all the old gentleman's grins. In the snuggery, rejoined Mr. Weller. Catch the red-nosed man a goin' eniver, but Veer the liquors is. Not he, Samuel, not he. Ve'd a worry pleasant ride along the road from the Marquis this mornin', Sammy, said Mr. Weller, when he felt himself equal to the task of speaking in an articulate manner. I drove the old piebald in that air little chay cart as belonged to your mother-in-law's first winter, into which a harm cheer woes lifted for the shepherd, and I'm blessed, said Mr. Weller, with a look of deep scorn. Blessed if they didn't bring a portable flight steps out into the road afront our door for him, to get up by. You don't mean that, said Sam. I do mean that, Sammy, replied his father. And I wish you could seen how tight he held on by the sides when he did get up, as if he was afeard being precipitated down full 6 foot, and dashed into 1,000,000 atoms. He tumbled in at last, however, and ave vent. And I rather think, Samuel, that he found himself a little jolted ven vi turned the corners. What, I s'pose you happened to drive up again a post or two, said Sam. I'm afeard, replied Mr. Weller, in a rapture of winks. I'm afeard. Took 1 or 2 on Sammy. He was a-flyin' out o' the armchair all the way. Here the old gentleman shook his head from side to side, and was seized with a hoarse internal rumbling, accompanied with a violent swelling of the countenance, and a sudden increase in the breadth of all his features, symptoms which alarmed his son not a little. Don't be frightened, Sammy, don't be frightened, said the old gentleman, when by dint of much struggling and various convulsive stamps upon the ground, he had recovered his voice. It's only a kind quiet laugh as I'm a-tryin' to come, Sammy. Well, if that's what it is, said Sam, you'd better not try to come it again. You'll find it rather a dangerous inwention. Don't you like it, Sammy? Inquired the old gentleman. Not at all, replied Sam. Well, said Mr. Weller, with the tears still running down his cheeks, it 'ud been a worry great accommodation to me if I could done it, and 'ud saved a good many vords atween your mother-in-law and me, sometimes. But I'm afeard you're right, Sammy. It's too much in the apoplexy line a deal too much, Samuel. This conversation brought them to the door of the snuggery, into which Sam, pausing for an instant to look over his shoulder, and cast a sly leer at his respected progenitor, who was still giggling behind at once led the way. Mother-in-law, said Sam, politely saluting the lady, worry much obliged to you for this here wisset. Shepherd, how air you? Oh, Samuel, said Mrs. Weller. This is dreadful. Not a bit on it, mum, replied Sam as it shepherd. Mr. Stiggins raised his hands and turned up his eyes until the whites, or rather the yellows, were alone visible, but made no reply in words. Is this here gentleman troubled with any painful complaint? Said Sam, looking to his mother-in-law for explanation. The good man is grieved to see you here, Samuel, replied Mrs. Weller. Oh, that's it, is it? Said Sam. I was afeard from his manner that he might ha forgotten to take pepper vith that ere last cowcumber he eat. Set down, sir, we make no extra charge for settin' down, as the king remarked when he blowed up his ministers. Young man, said Mr. Stiggins ostentatiously, I fear you are not softened by imprisonment. Beg your pardon, sir, replied Sam, what woes you graciously please to hobserve? I apprehend, young man, that your nature is no softer for this chastening, said Mr. Stiggins in a loud voice. Sir, replied Sam, you're worry kind to say so. I hope my nater is not a soft vun, sir. Worry much obliged to you for your good opinion, sir. At this point of the conversation, A sound, indecorously approaching to a laugh, was heard to proceed from the chair in which the elder Mr. Weller was seated, upon which Mrs. Weller, on a hasty consideration of all the circumstances of the case, considered it her bounden duty to become gradually hysterical. "Weller," said Mrs. W. The old gentleman was seated in a corner. "Weller, come forth." "Worry much obleeged to you, my dear," replied Mr. Weller, "but I'm quite comfortable vere I am." Upon this Mrs. Weller burst into tears. "What es gone wrong, mum?" said Sam. "Oh, Samuel," replied Mrs. Weller, "your father makes me wretched. Will nothing do him good?" "Do you hear this here?" said Sam. "Lady Vance to know whether nothin' all do you good. Worry much indebted to Mrs. Weller for her polite inquiries, Sammy," replied the old gentleman. "I think a pipe would benefit me a good deal. Could I be accommodated, Sammy?" Here Mrs. Weller let fall some more tears, and Mr. Stiggins groaned. "Hallo, here's this unfortunate gentleman took ill again," said Sam, looking round. "Vere do you feel it now, sir?" "In the same place, young man," rejoined Mr. Stiggins, "in the same place." "Vere may that be, sir?" inquired Sam, with great outward simplicity. "In the bosom, young man," replied Mr. Stiggins, placing his umbrella on his waistcoat. At this affecting reply, Mrs. Weller, being wholly unable to suppress her feelings, sobbed aloud, and stated her conviction that the red-nosed man was a saint. Whereupon Mr. Weller, senior, ventured to suggest, in an undertone, that he must be the representative of the united parishes of St. Simon without and St. Walker within. "I'm afeard, mum," said Sam, "that this here gentleman with the twist in his countenance feels rather thirsty with the melancholy spectacle afore him. Is it the case, mum?" The worthy lady looked at Mr. Stiggins for a reply. That gentleman, with many rollings of the eye, clenched his throat with his right hand, and mimicked the act of swallowing, to intimate that he was athirst. "I am afraid, Samuel, that his feelings have made him so indeed," said Mrs. Weller mournfully. "What's your usual tap, sir?" replied Sam. "Oh, my dear young friend," replied Mr. Stiggins, "all taps is vanities." Too true indeed," said Mrs. Weller, murmuring a groan, and shaking her head assentingly. "Well," said Sam, "I dessay they may be, sir, but which is your particular wanity?" "Which wanity do you like the flavor on best, sir?" "Oh, my dear young friend," replied Mr. Stiggins, "I despise them all." "If," said Mr. Stiggins, "if there is any one of them less odious than another, it is the liquor called rum. Warm, my dear young friend, with 3 lumps of sugar to the tumbler." "Worry sorry to say, sir," said Sam, "that they don't allow that particular wanity to be sold in this here establishment." "Oh, the hardness of heart of these inveterate men," ejaculated Mr. Stiggins. "Oh, the accursed cruelty of these inhuman persecutors." With these words, Mr. Stiggins again cast up his eyes, and rapped his breast with his umbrella. And it is but justice to the reverend gentleman to say that his indignation appeared very real and unfeigned indeed. After Mrs. Weller and the red-nosed gentleman had commented on this inhuman usage in a very forcible manner, and had vented a variety of pious and holy execrations against its authors, the latter recommended a bottle of port wine, warmed with a little water, spice, and sugar, as being grateful to the stomach, and savoring less of vanity than many other compounds. It was accordingly ordered to be prepared, and pending its preparation, the red-nosed man and Mrs. Weller looked at the elder W. and groaned. "Well, Sammy," said the gentleman, "I hope you'll find your spirits rose by this here lively wisset. Worry cheerful and improvin' conversation, ain't it, Sammy?" "You're a reprobate," replied Sam, "and I desire you won't address no more them ungraceful remarks to me." So far from being edified by this very proper reply, the elder Mr. Weller at once relapsed into a broad grin, and this inexorable conduct causing the lady and Mr. Stiggins to close their eyes and rock themselves to and fro on their chairs in a troubled manner, he furthermore indulged in several acts of pantomime, indicative of a desire to pummel and wring the nose of the aforesaid Stiggins, the performance of which appeared to afford him great mental relief. The old gentleman very narrowly escaped detection in one instance, for Mr. Stiggins happening to give a start on the arrival of the negus, brought his head in smart contact with the clenched fist with which Mr. Weller had been describing imaginary fireworks in the air, within 2 inches of his ear, for some minutes. "What are you reachin' out, your hand for the tumbler in that sowage way for?" said Sam, with great promptitude. "Don't you see you've hit the gentleman?" "I didn't go to do it, Sammy," said Mr. Weller, in some degree abashed by the very unexpected occurrence of the incident. "Try an inard application, sir," said Sam, as the red-nosed gentleman rubbed his head with a rueful visage. "What do you think o' that, for go o' wanity warm, sir?" Mr. Stiggins made no verbal answer, but his manner was expressive. He tasted the contents of the glass which Sam had placed in his hand, put his umbrella on the floor, and tasted it again, passing his hand placidly across his stomach twice or thrice. He then drank the whole at a breath, and smacking his lips, held out the tumbler for more. Nor was Mrs. Weller behindhand in doing justice to the composition. The good lady began by protesting that she couldn't touch a drop, then took a small drop, then a large drop, then a great many drops. And her feelings being of the nature of those substances which are powerfully affected by the application of strong waters, she dropped a tear with every drop of negus, and so got on, melting the feelings down, until at length she had arrived at a very pathetic and decent pitch of misery. The elder Mr. Weller observed these signs and tokens with many manifestations of disgust, and when, after a second jug of the same, Mr. Stiggins began to sigh in a dismal manner, he plainly evinced his disapprobation of the whole proceedings by sundry incoherent ramblings of speech, among which frequent angry repetitions of the word gammon were alone distinguishable to the ear. "I'll tell you what it is, Samuel, my boy," whispered the old gentleman into his son's ear, after a long and steadfast contemplation of his lady and Mr. Stiggins. "I think there must be something wrong in your mother-in-law, inside, as well as in that the red-nosed man." "What do you mean?" said Sam. "I mean this here, Sammy," replied the old gentleman, "that what they drink don't seem no nourishment to 'em. It all turns to warm water and comes pourin' out o' their eyes. 'Pend upon it, Sammy, it's a constitutional infirmity." Mr. Weller delivered this scientific opinion with many confirmatory frowns and nods, which Mrs. Weller remarking, and concluding that they bore some disparaging reference either to herself, or to Mr. Stiggins, or to both, was on the point of becoming infinitely worse, when Mr. Stiggins, getting on his legs as well as he could, proceeded to deliver an edifying discourse for the benefit of the company, but more especially of Mr. Samuel, whom he adjured in moving terms to be upon his guard in that sink of iniquity into which he was cast, to abstain from all hypocrisy and pride of heart, and to take in all things exact pattern and copy by him, Stiggins, in which case he might calculate on arriving, sooner or later, at the comfortable conclusion that, like him, he was a most estimable and blameless character, and that all his acquaintances and friends were hopelessly abandoned and profligate wretches. Which consideration, he said, could not but afford him the liveliest satisfaction. He furthermore conjured him to avoid, above all things, the vice of intoxication, which he likened unto the filthy habits of swine, and to those poisonous and baleful drugs which, being chewed in the mouth, are said to filch away the memory. At this point of his discourse, the reverend and red-nosed gentleman became singularly incoherent, and staggering to and fro in the excitement of his eloquence, was fain to catch at the back of a chair to preserve his perpendicular. Mr. Stiggins did not desire his hearers to be upon their guard against those false prophets and wretched mockers of religion, who, without sense to expound its first doctrines, or hearts to feel its first principles, are more dangerous members of society than the common criminal, imposing, as they necessarily do, upon the weakest and worst informed, casting scorn and contempt on what should be held most sacred, and bringing into partial disrepute large bodies of virtuous and well-conducted persons of many excellent sects and persuasions. But as he leaned over the back of the chair for a considerable time, and closing one eye, winked a good deal with the other, it is presumed that he thought all this, but kept it to himself. During the delivery of the oration, Mrs. Weller sobbed and wept at the end of the paragraphs, while Sam, sitting cross-legged on a chair and resting his arms on the top rail, regarded the speaker with great suavity and blandness of demeanor, occasionally bestowing a look of recognition on the old gentleman, who was delighted at the beginning and went to sleep about halfway. "Bravo, worry pretty," said Sam, when the red-nosed man, having finished, pulled his worn gloves on, thereby thrusting his fingers through the broken tops till the knuckles were disclosed to view. "Worry pretty. I hope it may do you good, Samuel," said Mrs. Weller solemnly. "I think it will, mum," replied Sam. "I wish I could hope that it would do your father good," said Mrs. Weller. "Thank ye, my dear," said Mr. Weller, Sr. "How do you find yourself arter it, my love?" "Scoffer," exclaimed Mrs. Weller. "Benighted man," said the Reverend Mr. Stiggins. "If I don't get no better light than that ere moonshine o' yourn, my worthy creetur," said the elder Mr. Weller, "it's worry likely as I shall continue to be a night coach till I'm took off the road altogether. Now, Mrs. If the piebald stands at livery much longer, he'll stand at nothin' as we go back, and P-raps that air harm cheer, all be tipped over into some hedge or another, with the shepherd in it." At this supposition, the Reverend Mr. Stiggins, in evident consternation, gathered up his hat and umbrella, and proposed an immediate departure, to which Mrs. Weller assented. Sam walked with them to the lodge gate, and took a dutiful leave. "Adu, Samivel," said the old gentleman. "What's adu?" inquired Sammy. "Well, good-bye then," said the old gentleman. "Oh, that's what you're aimin' at, is it?" said Sam. "Good-bye." "Sammy," whispered Mr. Weller, looking cautiously round, "my duty to your governor, and tell him if he thinks better o' this here business, to communicate with me. Me and a cabinet maker has dewised a plan for gettin' him out." "A pioneer, Samuel a pioneer," said Mr. Weller, striking his son on the chest with the back of his hand and falling back a step or two. "What do you mean?" said Sam. "A pioneer 40, Samuel," rejoined Mr. Weller in a still more mysterious manner, "as he can have on hire. Vun as vaunt play, Sammy." "And what 'ud be the good o' that?" said Sam. "Let him send to my friend, the cabinet maker, to fetch it back, Sammy," replied Mr. Weller. "Are you avake now?" "No," rejoined Sam. "There ain't no verks in it," whispered his father. "It-'ull hold him easy, vith his hat and shoes on and breathe through the legs, vich his holler. Have a passage ready taken for Meriker. The 'Merican government will never give him up, ven once they find as he's got money to spend, Sammy. Let the governor stop there till Mrs. Bardell's dead, or Mr. Dodson and Fogg's hung, which last you and I think is the most likely to happen first, Sammy, and then let him come back and write a book about the 'Mericans as'll pay all his expenses and more if he blows 'em up enough." Mr. Weller delivered this hurried abstract of his plot with great vehemence of whisper, and then, as if fearful of weakening the effect of the tremendous communication by any further dialogue, he gave the coachman's salute and vanished. Sam had scarcely recovered his usual composure of countenance, which had been greatly disturbed by the secret communication of his respected relative, when Mr. Pickwick accosted him. "Sam," said that gentleman. "Sir," replied Mr. Weller, "I am going for a walk round the prison, and I wish you to attend me." "I see a prisoner we know coming this way, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, smiling. "Which, sir?" inquired Mr. Weller. "The gentleman with the head o' hair, or the interestin' captive in the stockin' S?" "Neither," rejoined Mr. Pickwick. "He is an older friend of yours, Sam." "Oh, mine, sir," exclaimed Mr. Weller. "You recollect the gentleman very well, I dare say, Sam," replied Mr. Pickwick, "or else you are more unmindful of your old acquaintances than I think you are." "Hush! Not a word, Sam, not a syllable. Here he is." As Mr. Pickwick spoke, Jingle walked up. He looked less miserable than before, being clad in a half-worn suit of clothes, which, with Mr. Pickwick's assistance, had been released from the pawnbroker's. He wore clean linen too, and had had his hair cut. He was very pale and thin, however, and as he crept slowly up, leaning on a stick, it was easy to see that he had suffered severely from illness and want, and was still very weak. He took off his hat as Mr. Pickwick saluted him, and seemed much humbled and abashed at the sight of Sam Weller. Following close at his heels came Mr. Jobtrotter, in the catalogue of whose vices want of faith and attachment to his companion could at all events find no place. He was still ragged and squalid, but his face was not quite so hollow as on his first meeting with Mr. Pickwick, a few days before. As he took off his hat to our benevolent old friend, he murmured some broken expressions of gratitude and muttered something about having been saved from starving. "Well, well," said Mr. Pickwick, impatiently interrupting him, "you can follow with Sam. I want to speak to you, Mr. Jingle. Can you walk without his arm?" "Certainly, sir, already not too fast legs, shaky head queer round, and round earthquacky sort of feeling very." "Here, give me your arm," said Mr. Pickwick. "No, no," replied Jingle, "won't indeed rather not." "Nonsense," said Mr. Pickwick, "lean upon me I desire, sir." Seeing that he was confused and agitated, and uncertain what to do, Mr. Pickwick cut the matter short by drawing the invalided stroller's arm through his, and leading him away without saying another word about it. During the whole of this time, the countenance of Mr. Samuel Weller had exhibited an expression of the most overwhelming and absorbing astonishment that the imagination can portray. After looking from Job to Jingle and from Jingle to Job in profound silence, he softly ejaculated the words, "Well, I am damned," which he repeated at least a score of times. After which exertion, he appeared wholly bereft of speech, and again cast his eyes, first upon the one and then upon the other, in mute perplexity and bewilderment. "Now, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, looking back. "I'm a common, sir," replied Mr. Weller, mechanically following his master. And still he lifted not his eyes from Mr. Job Trotter, who walked at his side in silence. Job kept his eyes fixed on the ground for some time. Sam, with his glued to Job's countenance, ran up against the people who were walking about, and fell over little children, and stumbled against steps and railings, without appearing at all sensible of it, until Job, looking stealthily up, said, "How do you do, Mr. Weller?" "It is him," exclaimed Sam, and having established Job's identity beyond all doubt, he smote his leg, and vented his feelings in a long, shrill whistle. "Things has altered with me, sir," said Job. "I should think they had," exclaimed Mr. Weller, surveying his companion's rags with undisguised wonder. "This is rather a change for the worse, Mr. Trotter, as the gentleman said, when he got 2 doubtful shillin' S and 6 O, pocket pieces for a good half-crown." "It is indeed," replied Job, shaking his head. "There is no deception now, Mr. Weller." "Tears," said Job, with a look of momentary slyness, "tears are not the only proofs of distress, nor the best ones." "No, they ain't," replied Sam expressively. "They may be put on, Mr. Weller," said Job. "I know they may," said Sam. "Some people, indeed, has always ready laid on, and can pull out the plug whenever they likes." "Yes," replied Job, "but these sort of things are not so easily counterfeited, Mr. Weller, and it is a more painful process to get them up." As he spoke, he pointed to his sallow, sunken cheeks, and drawing up his coat sleeve, disclosed an arm which looked as if the bone could be broken at a touch, so sharp and brittle did it appear, beneath its thin covering of flesh. "What have you been doin' to yourself?" said Sam, recoiling. "Nothing," replied Job. "Nothin'," echoed Sam. "I have been doin' nothing for many weeks past," said Job, "and eating and drinking almost as little." Sam took one comprehensive glance at Mr. Trotter's thin face and wretched apparel, and then, seizing him by the arm, commenced dragging him away with great violence. "Where are you going, Mr. Weller?" said Job, vainly struggling in the powerful grasp of his old enemy. "Come on," said Sam, "come on." He deigned no further explanation till they reached the tap, and then called for a pot of porter, which was speedily produced. "Now," said Sam, "drink that up, every drop on it, and then turn the pot upside down, to let me see as you've took the medicine." "But my dear Mr. Weller," remonstrated Job. "Down with it," said Sam peremptorily. Thus admonished, Mr. Trotter raised the pot to his lips, and by gentle and almost imperceptible degrees, tilted it into the air. He paused once, and only once, to draw a long breath, but without raising his face from the vessel, which in a few moments thereafter he held out at arm's length, bottom upward. Nothing fell upon the ground but a few particles of froth, which slowly detached themselves from the rim and trickled lazily down. "Well done," said Sam. "How do you find yourself arter it?" "Better, sir." "I think I am better," responded Job. "Oh, course you air," said Sam argumentatively. "It's like puttin' gas in a balloon. I can see with the naked eye that you get stouter under the operation. What do you say to another the same dimensions?" "I would rather not, I am much obliged to you, sir," replied Job, much rather not. "Vell then, what do you say to some wittles?" inquired Sam. "Thanks to your worthy governor, sir," said Mr. Trotter. "We have half a leg of mutton, baked, at 3:15, with the potatoes under it to save boiling." "What? Has he been parwit in for you?" asked Sam emphatically. "He has, sir," replied Job. "More than that, Mr. Weller. My master being very ill, he got us a room. We were in a kennel before and paid for it, sir, and come to look at us at night when nobody should know." "Mr. Weller," said Job, with real tears in his eyes, "for once, I could serve that gentleman till I fell down dead at his feet." "I say," said Sam, "I'll trouble you, my friend." "None o' that." Job Trotter looked amazed. "None o' that, I say, young feller," repeated Sam firmly. "No man serves him but me. And now we're upon it, I'll let you into another secret besides that," said Sam, as he paid for the beer. "I never heard, mind you, or read of in storybooks, nor see in picters, any angel in tights and gaiters, not even in spectacles, as I remember, though that may ha been done for anythin'. I know to the contrary, but mark my vords, Job Trotter, he's a reglar thoroughbred angel for all that. And let me see the man as wenters to tell me he knows a better vun." With this defiance, Mr. Weller buttoned up his change in a side pocket, and, with many confirmatory nods and gestures by the way, proceeded in search of the subject of discourse. They found Mr. Pickwick, in company with Jingle, talking very earnestly, and not bestowing a look on the groups who were congregated on the racket ground. They were very motley groups, too, and worth the looking at, if it were only an idle curiosity. "Well," said Mr. Pickwick, as Sam and his companion drew nigh, "you will see how your health becomes, and think about it meanwhile. Make the statement out for me when you feel yourself equal to the task, and I will discuss the subject with you when I have considered it. Now go to your room. You are tired, and not strong enough to be out long." Mr. Alfred Jingle, without one spark of his old animation, with nothing even of the dismal gaiety which he had assumed when Mr. Pickwick first stumbled on him in his misery, bowed low without speaking, and motioning to Job not to follow him just yet, crept slowly away. "Curious scene this, is it not, Sam?" said Mr. Pickwick, looking good-humoredly round. "Worry much so, sir," replied Sam. "Wonders 'ull never cease," added Sam, speaking to himself. "I'm worry much mistaken if that Jingle warn't doin' somethin' in the water-cart way." The area formed by the wall in that part of the fleet in which Mr. Pickwick stood was just wide enough to make a good racket court, one side being formed, of course, by the wall itself, and the other by that portion of the prison which looked, or rather would have looked, but for the wall, towards St. Paul's Cathedral. Sauntering or sitting about, in every possible attitude of listless idleness, were a great number of debtors, the major part of whom were waiting in prison until their day of going up before the insolvent court should arrive, while others had been remanded for various terms, which they were idling away as they best could. Some were shabby, some were smart, many dirty, a few clean, but there they all lounged, and loitered, and slunk about with as little spirit or purpose as the beasts in a menagerie. Lolling from the windows which commanded a view of this promenade were a number of persons, some in noisy conversation with their acquaintance below, others playing at ball with some adventurous throwers outside, others looking on at the racket players, or watching the boys as they cried the game. Dirty, slipshod women passed and repassed, on their way to the cooking house in one corner of the yard. Children screamed and fought and played together in another. The tumbling of the skittles, and the shouts of the players, mingled perpetually with these and 100 other sounds, and all was noise and tumult save in a little miserable shed a few yards off, where lay, all quiet and ghastly, the body of the Chancery prisoner who had died the night before, awaiting the mockery of an inquest. The body. It is the lawyer's term for the restless, whirling mass of cares and anxieties, affections, hopes, and griefs that make up the living man. The law had his body, and there it lay, clothed in grave clothes, an awful witness to its tender mercy. "Would you like to see a whistling shop, sir?" inquired Job Trotter. What do you mean? Was Mr. Pickwick's counter-inquiry. A visslin shop, sir, interposed Mr. Weller. What is that, Sam, a bird fancier, S? Inquired Mr. Pickwick. Bless your heart, no, sir, replied Job. A whistling shop, sir, is where they sell spirits. Mr. Job Trotter briefly explained here that all persons, being prohibited under heavy penalties from conveying spirits into debtors' prisons, and such commodities being highly prized by the ladies and gentlemen confined therein, it had occurred to some speculative turnkey to connive, for certain lucrative considerations, at 2 or 3 prisoners retailing the favorite article of gin for their own profit and advantage. This plan, you see, sir, has been gradually introduced into all the prisons for debt, said Mr. Trotter. And it has this worry great advantage, said Sam, that the turnkeys takes worry good care to seize hold o' everybody but them as pays, that attempts the villainy, and when it gets in the papers they are applauded for their vigilance. So it cuts 2 ways frightens other people from the trade, and awaits their own characters. Exactly so, Mr. Weller, observed Job. Well, but are these rooms never searched to ascertain whether any spirits are concealed in them? Said Mr. Pickwick. Certainly they are, sir, replied Sam, but the turnkeys knows beforehand and gives the word to the whistlers, and you may whistle for it when you go to look. By this time, Job had tapped at a door, which was opened by a gentleman with an uncombed head, who bolted it after them when they had walked in, and grinned. Upon which Job grinned, and Sam also. Whereupon Mr. Pickwick, thinking it might be expected of him, kept on smiling to the end of the interview. The gentleman with the uncombed head appeared quite satisfied with this mute announcement of their business, and, producing a flat stone bottle, which might hold about a couple of quarts, from beneath his bedstead, filled out 3 glasses of gin, which Job Trotter and Sam disposed of in a most workmanlike manner. Any more? Said the whistling gentleman. No more, replied Job Trotter. Mr. Pickwick paid, the door was unbolted, and out they came, the uncombed gentleman bestowing a friendly nod upon Mr. Roker, who happened to be passing at the moment. From this spot, Mr. Pickwick wandered along all the galleries, up and down all the staircases, and once again round the whole area of the yard. The great body of the prison population appeared to be Mivins, and Smangle, and the parson, and the butcher, and the leg, over and over again. There were the same squalor, the same turmoil and noise, the same general characteristics in every corner, in the best and the worst alike. The whole place seemed restless and troubled, and the people were crowding and flitting to and fro, like the shadows in an uneasy dream. I have seen enough, said Mr. Pickwick, as he threw himself into a chair in his little apartment. My head aches with these scenes, and my heart too. Henceforth, I will be a prisoner in my own room. And Mr. Pickwick steadfastly adhered to this determination. For 3 long months he remained shut up, all day, only stealing out at night to breathe the air, when the greater part of his fellow prisoners were in bed or carousing in their rooms. His health was beginning to suffer from the closeness of the confinement, but neither the often-repeated entreaties of Perker and his friends, nor the still more frequently repeated warnings and admonitions of Mr. Samuel Weller, could induce him to alter one jot of his inflexible resolution. Chapter 46 records a touching ACT of delicate feeling, not unmixed with pleasantry, achieved and performed by Messrs. Dodson and Fogg. It was within a week of the close of the month of July that a hackney cabriolet, number unrecorded, was seen to proceed at a rapid pace up Goswell Street. 3 people were squeezed into it besides the driver, who sat in his own particular little dickey at the side. Over the apron were hung 2 shawls, belonging to 2 small vixenish-looking ladies under the apron, between whom, compressed into a very small compass, was stowed away a gentleman of heavy and subdued demeanor, who, whenever he ventured to make an observation, was snapped up short by one of the vixenish ladies before mentioned. Lastly, the 2 vixenish ladies and the heavy gentleman were giving the driver contradictory directions, all tending to the one point, that he should stop at Mrs. Bardell's door, which the heavy gentleman, in direct opposition to, and defiance of the vixenish ladies, contended was a green door and not a yellow one. Stop at the house with a green door, driver, said the heavy gentleman. Oh, you perwerse creetur, exclaimed one of the vixenish ladies. "Drive to the ooze with the yellow door, cabman." Upon this, the cabman, who in a sudden effort to pull up at the house with the green door, had pulled the horse up so high that he nearly pulled him backward into the cabriolet, let the animal's forelegs down to the ground again, and paused. "Now veer am I to pull up?" inquired the driver. "Settle it among yourselves. All I ask is veer." Here the contest was renewed with increased violence, and the horse being troubled with a fly on his nose, the cabman humanely employed his leisure in lashing him about on the head, on the counter-irritation principle. "Most Watts carries the day," said one of the vixenish ladies at length. "The ooze with the yellow door, cabman." But after the cabriolet had dashed up, in splendid style, to the house with the yellow door, making, as one of the vixenish ladies triumphantly said, actually more noise than if one had come in one's own carriage. And after the driver had dismounted to assist the ladies in getting out, the small round head of Master Thomas Bardell was thrust out of the one-pair window of a house with a red door, a few numbers off. "A Growatin thing," said the vixenish lady last mentioned, darting a withering glance at the heavy gentleman. "My dear, it's not my fault," said the gentleman. "Don't talk to me, you creeter, don't," retorted the lady. "The house with the red door, cabman." "Oh, if ever a woman was troubled with a ruffianly creeter, that takes a pride and a pleasure in disgracing his wife on every possible occasion afore strangers, I am that woman." "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Rattle," said the other little woman, who was no other than Mrs. Cluppins. "What have I been a-doing of?" asked Mr. Rattle. "Don't talk to me, don't, you brute, for fear I should be provoked to forget my sect and strike you," said Mrs. Rattle. While this dialogue was going on, the driver was most ignominiously leading the horse, by the bridle, up to the house with the red door, which Master Bardell had already opened. Here was a mean and low way of arriving at a friend's house. No dashing up with all the fire and fury of the animal, no jumping down of the driver, no loud knocking at the door, no opening of the apron with a crash at the very last moment for fear of the ladies sitting in a draught, and then the man handing the shawls out, afterwards, as if he were a private coachman. The whole edge of the thing had been taken off it, was flatter than walking. "Well, Tommy," said Mrs. Cluppins, "how's your poor dear mother?" "Oh, she's very well," replied Master Bardell. "She's in the front parlor, all ready." "I'm ready too, I am." Here Master Bardell put his hands in his pockets and jumped off and on the bottom step of the door. "Is anybody else a-goin', Tommy?" said Mrs. Cluppins, arranging her pelerine. "Mrs. Sanders is going, she is," replied Tommy. "I'm going too, I am." "Drat the boy," said little Mrs. Cluppins. "He thinks of nobody but himself." "Here, Tommy, dear." "Well," said Master Bardell. "Who else is a-goin', lovey?" said Mrs. Cluppins in an insinuating manner. "Oh, Mrs. Rogers is a-goin'," replied Master Bardell, opening his eyes very wide as he delivered the intelligence. "What? The lady as has taken the lodgings," ejaculated Mrs. Cluppins. Master Bardell put his hands deeper down into his pockets and nodded exactly 35 times to imply that it was the lady lodger and no other. "Bless us," said Mrs. Cluppins. "It's quite a party." "Ah, if you knew what was in the cupboard, you'd say so," replied Master Bardell. "What is there, Tommy?" said Mrs. Cluppins coaxingly. "You'll tell me, Tommy, I know." "No, I won't," replied Master Bardell, shaking his head and applying himself to the bottom step again. "Drat the child," muttered Mrs. Cluppins. "What a prowakin little wretch it is." "Come, Tommy, tell your dear Cluppy." "Mother said I wasn't to," rejoined Master Bardell. "I'm a-goin' to have some, I am." Cheered by this prospect, the precocious boy applied himself to his infantile treadmill with increased vigor. The above examination of a child of tender years took place while Mr. and Mrs. Rattle and the cab driver were having an altercation concerning the fare, which, terminating at this point in favor of the cabman, Mrs. Rattle came up tottering. "Lock Mary Ann." "What's the matter?" said Mrs. Cluppins. "It's put me all over in such a tremble, Betsy," replied Mrs. Rattle. Rattle ain't like a man, he leaves everything to me. This was scarcely fair upon the unfortunate Mr. Rattle, who had been thrust aside by his good lady in the commencement of the dispute, and peremptorily commanded to hold his tongue. He had no opportunity of defending himself, however, for Mrs. Rattle gave unequivocal signs of fainting, which, being perceived from the parlor window, Mrs. Bardell, Mrs. Sanders, the lodger, and the lodger's servant darted precipitately out and conveyed her into the house, all talking at the same time and giving utterance to various expressions of pity and condolence, as if she were one of the most suffering mortals on earth. Being conveyed into the front parlor, she was there deposited on a sofa, and the lady from the first floor running up to the first floor returned with a bottle of sal volatile, which, holding Mrs. Rattle tight round the neck, she applied in all womanly kindness and pity to her nose, until that lady with many plunges and struggles was fain to declare herself decidedly better. "Ah, poor thing," said Mrs. Rogers, "I know what her feelin' is too well." "Ah, poor thing." "So do I," said Mrs. Sanders, and then all the ladies moaned in unison, and said they knew what it was, and they pitied her from their hearts, they did. Even the lodger's little servant, who was 13 years old and 3 feet high, murmured her sympathy. "But what's been the matter?" said Mrs. Bardell. "Ah, what has decomposed you, ma'am?" inquired Mrs. Rogers. "I have been a good deal flurried," replied Mrs. Rattle in a reproachful manner. Thereupon the ladies cast indignant glances at Mr. Rattle. "Why, the fact is," said that unhappy gentleman, stepping forward, "when we alighted at this door, a dispute arose with the driver of the cabriolet. A loud scream from his wife, at the mention of this word, rendered all further explanation inaudible. "You'd better leave us to bring her round, Rattle," said Mrs. Cluppins. "She'll never get better as long as you're here." All the ladies concurred in this opinion, so Mr. Rattle was pushed out of the room and requested to give himself an airing in the backyard, which he did for about a quarter of an hour, when Mrs. Bardell announced to him with a solemn face that he might come in now, but that he must be very careful how he behaved towards his wife. She knew he didn't mean to be unkind, but Mary Ann was very far from strong, and, if he didn't take care, he might lose her when he least expected it, which would be a very dreadful reflection for him afterwards, and so on. All this Mr. Rattle heard with great submission, and presently returned to the parlor in a most lamb-like manner. "Why, Mrs. Rogers, ma'am," said Mrs. Bardell, "you've never been introduced, I declare." "Mr. Rattle, ma'am, Mrs. Cluppins, ma'am, Mrs. Rattle, ma'am." "Which is Mrs. Cluppins's sister," suggested Mrs. Sanders. "Oh, indeed," said Mrs. Rogers graciously, for she was the lodger and her servant was in waiting, so she was more gracious than intimate, in right of her position. "Oh, indeed." Mrs. Rattle smiled sweetly, Mr. Rattle bowed, and Mrs. Cluppins said she was sure she was very happy to have an opportunity of being known to a lady which she adhered so much in favor of, as Mrs. Rogers, a compliment which the last-named lady acknowledged with graceful condescension. "Well, Mr. Rattle," said Mrs. Bardell, "I'm sure you ought to feel very much honored at you, and Tommy being the only gentleman to escort so many ladies all the way to the Spaniards, at Hampstead. Don't you think he ought, Mrs. Rogers, ma'am?" "Oh, certainly, ma'am," replied Mrs. Rogers, after whom all the other ladies responded, "Oh, certainly." "Of course I feel it, ma'am," said Mr. Rattle, rubbing his hands and evincing a slight tendency to brighten up a little. "Indeed, to tell you the truth," I said, as we was a-coming along in the cabriolet. At the recapitulation of the word, which awakened so many painful recollections, Mrs. Rattle applied her handkerchief to her eyes again and uttered a half-suppressed scream, so that Mrs. Bardell frowned upon Mr. Rattle to intimate that he had better not say anything more, and desired Mrs. Rogers's servant with an air to put the wine on. This was the signal for displaying the hidden treasures of the closet, which comprised sundry plates of oranges and biscuits, and a bottle of old crusted port that, at 1 9 with another of the celebrated East India sherry, at 14 pence, which were all produced in honor of the lodger, and afforded unlimited satisfaction to everybody. After great consternation had been excited in the mind of Mrs. Cluppins by an attempt on the part of Tommy to recount how he had been cross-examined regarding the cupboard, then in action, which was fortunately nipped in the bud by his imbibing half a glass of the old crusted the wrong way, and thereby endangering his life for some seconds, the party walked forth in quest of a Hampstead stage. This was soon found, and in a couple of hours they all arrived safely in the Spaniard's tea gardens, where the luckless Mr. Rattle's very first act nearly occasioned his good lady a relapse, it being neither more nor less than to order tea for 7, whereas, as the ladies one and all remarked, what could have been easier than for Tommy to have drank out of anybody's cup or everybody's, if that was all when the waiter wasn't looking, which would have saved 1 head of tea, and the tea just as good. However, there was no help for it, and the tea tray came, with 7 cups and saucers, and bread and butter on the same scale. Mrs. Bardell was unanimously voted into the chair, and Mrs. Rogers being stationed on her right hand, and Mrs. Rattle on her left, the meal proceeded with great merriment and success. How sweet the country is, to be sure, sighed Mrs. Rogers. I almost wish I lived in it always. Oh, you wouldn't like that, ma'am, replied Mrs. Bardell rather hastily, for it was not at all advisable with reference to the lodgings to encourage such notions. You wouldn't like it, ma'am. Oh, I should think you was a deal too lively and sought after, to be content with the country, ma'am, said little Mrs. Cluppins. Perhaps I am, ma'am. Perhaps I am, sighed the first-floor lodger. For lone people as have got nobody to care for them, or take care of them, or as have been hurt in their mind, or that kind of thing, observed Mr. Rattle, plucking up a little cheerfulness and looking round. The country is all very well. The country for a wounded spirit, they say. Now, of all things in the world that the unfortunate man could have said, any would have been preferable to this. Of course, Mrs. Bardell burst into tears and requested to be led from the table instantly, upon which the affectionate child began to cry too, most dismally. Would anybody believe, ma'am, exclaimed Mrs. Rattle, turning fiercely to the first-floor lodger, that a woman could be married to such a unmanly creature, which can tamper with a woman's feelings as he does, every hour in the day, ma'am. My dear, remonstrated Mr. Rattle, I didn't mean anything, my dear. You didn't mean, repeated Mrs. Rattle, with great scorn and contempt. Go away. I can't bear the sight on you, you brute. You must not flurry yourself, Mary Ann, interposed Mrs. Cluppins. You really must consider yourself, my dear, which you never do. Now go away, Rattle, there's a good soul, or you'll only aggravate her. You had better take your tea by yourself, sir, indeed, said Mrs. Rogers, again applying the smelling bottle. Mrs. Sanders, who, according to custom, was very busy with the bread and butter, expressed the same opinion, and Mr. Rattle quietly retired. After this, there was a great hoisting up of Master Bardell, who was rather a large size for hugging, into his mother's arms, in which operation he got his boots in the tea-board, and occasioned some confusion among the cups and saucers. But that description of fainting fits, which is contagious among ladies, seldom lasts long. So when he had been well kissed and a little cried over, Mrs. Bardell recovered, set him down again, wondering how she could have been so foolish, and poured out some more tea. It was at this moment that the sound of approaching wheels was heard, and that the ladies, looking up, saw a hackney coach stop at the garden gate. More company, said Mrs. Sanders. It's a gentleman, said Mrs. Rattle. Well, if it ain't Mr. Jackson, the young man from Dodson and Fogg S., cried Mrs. Bardell. Why, gracious. Surely Mr. Pickwick can't have paid the damages. Or Hofford marriage, said Mrs. Cluppins. Dear me, how slow the gentleman is, exclaimed Mrs. Rogers. Why doesn't he make haste? As the lady spoke these words, Mr. Jackson turned from the coach where he had been addressing some observations to a shabby man in black leggings, who had just emerged from the vehicle with a thick ash stick in his hand, and made his way to the place where the ladies were seated, winding his hair round the brim of his hat as he came along. Is anything the matter? Has anything taken place, Mr. Jackson? Said Mrs. Bardell eagerly. Nothing whatever, ma'am, replied Mr. Jackson. How to do, ladies? Have to ask pardon, ladies, for intruding, but the law, ladies, the law. With this apology, Mr. Jackson smiled, made a comprehensive bow, and gave his hair another wind. Mrs. Rogers whispered Mrs. Rattle that he was really an elegant young man. I called in Goswell Street, resumed Mr. Jackson, and hearing that you were here from the slavey, took a coach and came on. Our people want you down in the city directly, Mrs. Bardell. Lor, ejaculated that lady, starting at the sudden nature of the communication. Yes, said Mr. Jackson, biting his lip. It's very important and pressing business, which can't be postponed on any account. Indeed, Dodson expressly said so to me, and so did Fogg. I've kept the coach on purpose for you to go back in. How very strange, exclaimed Mrs. Bardell. The ladies agreed that it was very strange, but were unanimously of opinion that it must be very important, or Dodson and Fogg would never have sent. And further, that the business being urgent, she ought to repair to Dodson and Fogg's without any delay. There was a certain degree of pride and importance about being wanted by one's lawyers in such a monstrous hurry. That was by no means displeasing to Mrs. Bardell, especially as it might be reasonably supposed to enhance her consequence in the eyes of the first-floor lodger. She simpered a little, affected extreme vexation and hesitation, and at last arrived at the conclusion that she supposed she must go. But won't you refresh yourself after your walk, Mr. Jackson? Said Mrs. Bardell persuasively. Why, really there ain't much time to lose, replied Jackson, and I've got a friend here, he continued, looking towards the man with the ash stick. Oh, ask your friend to come here, sir, said Mrs. Bardell. Pray ask your friend here, sir. Why, thank ye, I'd rather not, said Mr. Jackson, with some embarrassment of manner. He's not much used to ladies' society, and it makes him bashful. If you'll order the waiter to deliver him anything short, he won't drink it off at once, won't he? Only try him. Mr. Jackson's fingers wandered playfully round his nose at this portion of his discourse, to warn his hearers that he was speaking ironically. The waiter was at once dispatched to the bashful gentleman, and the bashful gentleman took something. Mr. Jackson also took something, and the ladies took something, for hospitality's sake. Mr. Jackson then said he was afraid it was time to go, upon which Mrs. Sanders, Mrs. Cluppins, and Tommy, who it was arranged should accompany Mrs. Bardell, leaving the others to Mr. Rattle's protection, got into the coach. Isaac, said Jackson as Mrs. Bardell prepared to get in, looking up at the man with the ash stick, who was seated on the box, smoking a cigar. Well, this is Mrs. Bardell. Oh, I knowed that long ago, said the man. Mrs. Bardell got in, Mr. Jackson got in after her, and away they drove. Mrs. Bardell could not help ruminating on what Mr. Jackson's friend had said. Shrewd creatures, those lawyers. Lord bless us, how they find people out. Sad thing about these costs of our people's, ain't it? Said Jackson, when Mrs. Cluppins and Mrs. Sanders had fallen asleep. Your bill of costs, I mean. I'm very sorry they can't get them, replied Mrs. Bardell. But if you law gentlemen do these things on speculation, why you must get a loss now and then, you know. You gave them a cognivant for the amount of your costs, after the trial, I'm told, said Jackson. Yes. Just as a matter of form, replied Mrs. Bardell. Certainly, replied Jackson dryly. Quite a matter of form. Quite. On they drove, and Mrs. Bardell fell asleep. She was awakened, after some time, by the stopping of the coach. Bless us, said the lady. Are we at Freeman's Court? We're not going quite so far, replied Jackson. Have the goodness to step out. Mrs. Bardell, not yet thoroughly awake, complied. It was a curious place, a large wall with a gate in the middle and a gaslight burning inside. Now, ladies, cried the man with the ash stick, looking into the coach and shaking Mrs. Sanders to wake her, come, rousing her friend Mrs. Sanders alighted. Mrs. Bardell, leaning on Jackson's arm and leading Tommy by the hand, had already entered the porch. They followed. The room they turned into was even more odd-looking than the porch. Such a number of men standing about. And they stared so. "What place is this?" inquired Mrs. Bardell, pausing. "Only one of our public offices," replied Jackson, hurrying her through a door and looking round to see that the other women were following. "Look sharp, Isaac." "Safe and sound," replied the man with the ash stick. The door swung heavily after them, and they descended a small flight of steps. "Here we are at last." "All right and tight, Mrs. Bardell," said Jackson, looking exultingly round. "What do you mean?" said Mrs. Bardell, with a palpitating heart. "Just this," replied Jackson, drawing her a little on one side. "Don't be frightened, Mrs. Bardell. There never was a more delicate man than Dodson, ma'am, or a more humane man than Fogg. It was their duty in the way of business to take you in execution for them costs, but they were anxious to spare your feelings as much as they could. What a comfort it must be to you to think how it's been done. This is the Fleet, ma'am. Wish you good night, Mrs. Bardell. Good night, Tommy." As Jackson hurried away in company with the man with the ash stick, another man, with a key in his hand, who had been looking on, led the bewildered female to a second short flight of steps leading to a doorway. "Mrs. Bardell screamed violently, Tommy roared, "Mrs. Cluppin shrunk within herself, and Mrs. Sanders made off without more ado. For there stood the injured Mr. Pickwick, taking his nightly allowance of air, and beside him leant Samuel Weller, who, seeing Mrs. Bardell, took his hat off with mock reverence, while his master turned indignantly on his heel. "Don't bother the woman," said the turnkey to Weller. "She's just come in." "A prisoner," said Sam, quickly replacing his hat. "Who's the plaintiffs?" "What for?" "Speak up, old feller." "Dodson and Fogg," replied the man. "Execution on cognivant for costs." "Here, job," shouted Sam, dashing into the passage. "Run to Mr. Perker's job. I want him directly. I see some good in this. Here's a game. Hooray. Vere's the governor." But there was no reply to these inquiries, for Job had started furiously off the instant he received his commission, and Mrs. Bardell had fainted in real downright earnest. Chapter 47 is chiefly devoted to matters of business, and the temporal advantage of Dodson and Fogg. Mr. Winkle reappears under extraordinary circumstances. Mr. Pickwick's benevolence proves stronger than his obstinacy. Job Trotter, abating nothing of his speed, ran up Holborn, sometimes in the middle of the road, sometimes on the pavement, sometimes in the gutter, as the chances of getting along varied with the press of men, women, children, and coaches in each division of the thoroughfare, and regardless of all obstacles stopped not for an instant until he reached the gate of Gray's Inn. Notwithstanding all the expedition he had used, however, the gate had been closed a good half-hour when he reached it, and by the time he had discovered Mr. Perker's laundress, who lived with a married daughter, who had bestowed her hand upon a non-resident waiter, who occupied the one pair of some number in some street closely adjoining to some brewery somewhere behind Gray's Inn Lane, it was within 15 minutes of closing the prison for the night. Mr. Lowton had still to be ferreted out from the back parlor of the Magpie and Stump, and Job had scarcely accomplished this object and communicated Sam Weller's message when the clock struck 10. "There," said Lowton, "it's too late now. You can't get in tonight. You've got the key of the street, my friend." "Never mind me," replied Job. "I can sleep anywhere. But won't it be better to see Mr. Perker tonight, so that we may be there the first thing in the morning?" "Why," responded Lowton, after a little consideration, "if it was in anybody else's case, Perker wouldn't be best pleased at my going up to his house. But as it's Mr. Pickwick's, I think I may venture to take a cab and charge it to the office." Deciding on this line of conduct, Mr. Lowton took up his hat, and begging the assembled company to appoint a deputy chairman during his temporary absence, led the way to the nearest coach stand. Summoning the cab of most promising appearance, he directed the driver to repair to Montague Place, Russell Square. Mr. Perker had had a dinner party that day, as was testified by the appearance of lights in the drawing-room windows, the sound of an improved grand piano, and an improvable cabinet voice issuing therefrom, and a rather overpowering smell of meat which pervaded the steps and entry. In fact, a couple of very good country agencies happening to come up to town, at the same time, an agreeable little party had been got together to meet them, comprising Mr. Snicks, the Life Office Secretary, Mr. Prosy, the eminent counsel, 3 solicitors, 1 commissioner of bankrupts, a special pleader from the Temple, a small-eyed peremptory young gentleman, his pupil, who had written a lively book about the law of demises, with a vast quantity of marginal notes and references, and several other eminent and distinguished personages. From this society, little Mr. Perker detached himself, on his clerk being announced in a whisper, and repairing to the dining-room, there found Mr. Lowton and Job Trotter looking very dim and shadowy by the light of a kitchen candle, which the gentleman who condescended to appear in plush shorts and cottons for a quarterly stipend had, with a becoming contempt for the clerk and all things appertaining to the office, placed upon the table. "Now, Lote," said little Mr. Perker, shutting the door, "what's the matter? No important letter come in a parcel, is there?" "No, sir," replied Lote. "This is a messenger from Mr. Pickwick, sir." "From Pickwick, eh?" said the little man, turning quickly to Job. "Well, what is it?" "Dodson and Fogg have taken Mrs. Bardell in execution for her costs, sir," said Job. "No," exclaimed Perker, putting his hands in his pockets and reclining against the sideboard. "Yes," said Job. "It seems they got a cognizant out of her, for the amount of M, directly after the trial." "By Jove," said Perker, taking both hands out of his pockets and striking the knuckles of his right against the palm of his left, emphatically, "those are the cleverest scamps I ever had anything to do with." "The sharpest practitioners I ever knew, sir," observed Lowton. "Sharp," echoed Perker. "There's no knowing where to have them." "Very true, sir, there is not," replied Lowton. And then both master and man pondered for a few seconds, with animated countenances, as if they were reflecting upon one of the most beautiful and ingenious discoveries that the intellect of man had ever made. When they had in some measure recovered from their trance of admiration, Job Trotter discharged himself of the rest of his commission. Perker nodded his head thoughtfully and pulled out his watch. "At 10 precisely, I will be there," said the little man. "Sam is quite right." "Tell him so." "Will you take a glass of wine, Lote?" "No, thank you, sir." "You mean yes, I think," said the little man, turning to the sideboard for a decanter and glasses. As Lowton did mean yes, he said no more on the subject, but inquired of Job in an audible whisper whether the portrait of Perker, which hung opposite the fireplace, wasn't a wonderful likeness, to which Job of course replied that it was. The wine being by this time poured out, Lowton drank to Mrs. Perker and the children, and Job to Perker. The gentleman in the plush shorts and cottons considering it no part of his duty to show the people from the office out, consistently declined to answer the bell, and they showed themselves out. The attorney betook himself to his drawing-room, the clerk to the Magpie and Stump, and Job to Covent Garden Market to spend the night in a vegetable basket. Punctually at the appointed hour next morning, the good-humored little attorney tapped at Mr. Pickwick's door, which was opened with great alacrity by Sam Weller. "Mr. Perker, sir," said Sam, announcing the visitor to Mr. Pickwick, who was sitting at the window in a thoughtful attitude. "Worry glad you've looked in accidentally, sir. I rather think the governor wants to have a word and a half with you, sir." Perker bestowed a look of intelligence on Sam, intimating that he understood he was not to say he had been sent for, and beckoning him to approach, whispered briefly in his ear. "You don't mean that, sir," said Sam, starting back in excessive surprise. Perker nodded and smiled. Mr. Samuel Weller looked at the little lawyer, then at Mr. Pickwick, then at the ceiling, then at Perker again, grinned, laughed outright, and finally, catching up his hat from the carpet without further explanation, disappeared. "What does this mean?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, looking at Perker with astonishment. "What has put Sam into this extraordinary state?" "Oh, nothing, nothing," replied Perker. "Come, my dear sir, draw up your chair to the table. I have a good deal to say to you." "What papers are those?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, as the little man deposited on the table a small bundle of documents tied with red tape. "The papers in Bardell and Pickwick," replied Perker, undoing the knot with his teeth. Mr. Pickwick grated the legs of his chair against the ground, and throwing himself into it, folded his hands and looked sternly if Mr. Pickwick ever could look sternly at his legal friend. "You don't like to hear the name of the cause," said the little man, still busying himself with the knot. "No, I do not indeed," replied Mr. Pickwick. "Sorry for that," resumed Perker, "because it will form the subject of our conversation." "I would rather that the subject should be never mentioned between us, Perker," interposed Mr. Pickwick hastily. "Pooh, pooh, my dear sir," said the little man, untying the bundle and glancing eagerly at Mr. Pickwick out of the corners of his eyes. "It must be mentioned. I have come here on purpose. Now, are you ready to hear what I have to say, my dear sir?" "No hurry. If you are not, I can wait. I have this morning's paper here. Your time shall be mine." There, hereupon, the little man threw one leg over the other, and made a show of beginning to read with great composure and application. "Well, well," said Mr. Pickwick with a sigh, but softening into a smile at the same time. "Say what you have to say. It's the old story, I suppose." "With a difference, my dear sir, with a difference," rejoined Perker, deliberately folding up the paper and putting it into his pocket again. "Mrs. Bardell, the plaintiff in the action, is within these walls, sir." "I know it," was Mr. Pickwick's reply. "Very good," retorted Perker. "And you know how she comes here, I suppose? I mean, on what grounds and at whose suit?" "Yes, at least I have heard Sam's account of the matter," said Mr. Pickwick, with affected carelessness. "Sam's account of the matter," replied Perker, "is, I will venture to say, a perfectly correct one. Well now, my dear sir, the first question I have to ask is whether this woman is to remain here." "To remain here," echoed Mr. Pickwick. "To remain here, my dear sir," rejoined Perker, leaning back in his chair and looking steadily at his client. "How can you ask me?" said that gentleman. "It rests with Dodson and Fogg, you know that very well." "I know nothing of the kind," retorted Perker firmly. "It does not rest with Dodson and Fogg. You know the men, my dear sir, as well as I do. It rests solely, wholly, and entirely with you." "With me," ejaculated Mr. Pickwick, rising nervously from his chair and reseating himself directly afterwards. The little man gave a double knock on the lid of his snuff-box, opened it, took a great pinch, shut it up again, and repeated the words, "With you." "I say, my dear sir," resumed the little man, who seemed to gather confidence from the snuff, "I say, that her speedy liberation or perpetual imprisonment rests with you, and with you alone. Hear me out, my dear sir, if you please, and do not be so very energetic, for it will only put you into a perspiration and do no good whatever. I say," continued Perker, checking off each position on a different finger, as he laid it down, "I say that nobody but you can rescue her from this den of wretchedness, and that you can only do that by paying the costs of this suit both of plaintiff and defendant into the hands of these freeman court sharks. Now pray be quiet, my dear sir." Mr. Pickwick, whose face had been undergoing most surprising changes during this speech, and was evidently on the verge of a strong burst of indignation, calmed his wrath as well as he could. Perker, strengthening his argumentative powers with another pinch of snuff, proceeded. "I have seen the woman this morning. By paying the costs, you can obtain a full release and discharge from the damages, and further this I know is a far greater object of consideration with you, my dear sir, a voluntary statement, under her hand, in the form of a letter to me, that this business was, from the very first, fomented and encouraged and brought about by these men, Dodson and Fogg, that she deeply regrets ever having been the instrument of annoyance or injury to you, and that she entreats me to intercede with you and implore your pardon. If I pay her costs for her," said Mr. Pickwick indignantly. "A valuable document, indeed." "No, if in the case, my dear sir," said Perker triumphantly. "There is the very letter I speak of, brought to my office by another woman at 9 o'clock this morning, before I had set foot in this place, or held any communication with Mrs. Bardell, upon my honor." Selecting the letter from the bundle, the little lawyer laid it at Mr. Pickwick's elbow and took snuff for 2 consecutive minutes without winking. "Is this all you have to say to me?" inquired Mr. Pickwick mildly. "Not quite," replied Perker. I cannot undertake to say, at this moment, whether the wording of the cognate, the nature of the ostensible consideration, and the proof we can get together about the whole conduct of the suit will be sufficient to justify an indictment for conspiracy. I fear not, my dear sir, they are too clever for that, I doubt. I do mean to say, however, that the whole facts, taken together, will be sufficient to justify you, in the minds of all reasonable men. And now, my dear sir, I put it to you. This £150, or whatever it may be, take it in round numbers, is nothing to you. A jury had decided against you. Well, their verdict is wrong, but still they decided as they thought right, and it is against you. You have now an opportunity, on easy terms, of placing yourself in a much higher position than you ever could by remaining here, which would only be imputed, by people who didn't know you, to sheer dogged, wrong-headed, brutal obstinacy. Nothing else, my dear sir, believe me. Can you hesitate to avail yourself of it when it restores you to your friends, your old pursuits, your health and amusements? When it liberates your faithful and attached servant, whom you otherwise doom to imprisonment for the whole of your life? And above all, when it enables you to take the very magnanimous revenge which I know, my dear sir, is one after your own heart of releasing this woman from a scene of misery and debauchery, to which no man should ever be consigned, if I had my will, but the infliction of which on any woman is even more frightful and barbarous. Now I ask you, my dear sir, not only as your legal adviser, but as your very true friend, will you let slip the occasion of attaining all these objects, and doing all this good, for the paltry consideration of a few pounds finding their way into the pockets of a couple of rascals, to whom it makes no manner of difference, except that the more they gain, the more they'll seek, and so the sooner be led into some piece of knavery that must end in a crash. I have put these considerations to you, my dear sir, very feebly and imperfectly, but I ask you to think of them. Turn them over in your mind as long as you please. I wait here most patiently for your answer. Before Mr. Pickwick could reply, before Mr. Perker had taken 1/20th part of the snuff with which so unusually long an address imperatively required to be followed up, there was a low murmuring of voices outside, and then a hesitating knock at the door. "Dear, dear," exclaimed Mr. Pickwick, who had been evidently roused by his friend's appeal. "What an annoyance that door is." "Who is that?" "Me, sir," replied Sam Weller, putting in his head. "I can't speak to you just now, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "I am engaged at this moment, Sam." "Beg your pardon, sir," rejoined Mr. Weller. "But here's a lady here, sir, as says she's somethin' worry particular to disclose." "I can't see any lady," replied Mr. Pickwick, whose mind was filled with visions of Mrs. Bardell. "I wouldn't make too sure o' that, sir," urged Mr. Weller, shaking his head. "If you knowed who was near, sir, I rather think you'd change your note." As the hawk remarked to himself with a cheerful laugh, then he heard the robin redbreast a singin' round the corner. "Who is it?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "Will you see her, sir?" asked Mr. Weller, holding the door in his hand as if he had some curious live animal on the other side. "I suppose I must," said Mr. Pickwick, looking at Perker. "Well then, all in to begin," cried Sam. "Sound the gong, draw up the curtain, and enter the two conspirators." As Sam Weller spoke, he threw the door open, and there rushed tumultuously into the room Mr. Nathaniel Winkle, leading after him by the hand, the identical young lady who at Dingley Dell had worn the boots with the fur round the tops, and who, now a very pleasing compound of blushes and confusion, and lilac silk, and a smart bonnet, and a rich lace veil, looked prettier than ever. "Miss Arabella Allen," exclaimed Mr. Pickwick, rising from his chair. "No," replied Mr. Winkle, dropping on his knees. "Mrs. Winkle." "Pardon, my dear friend, pardon." Mr. Pickwick could scarcely believe the evidence of his senses, and perhaps would not have done so, but for the corroborative testimony afforded by the smiling countenance of Perker, and the bodily presence in the background of Sam and the pretty housemaid, who appeared to contemplate the proceedings with the liveliest satisfaction. "Oh, Mr. Pickwick," said Arabella in a low voice, as if alarmed at the silence, "can you forgive my imprudence?" Mr. Pickwick returned no verbal response to this appeal, but he took off his spectacles in great haste, and seizing both the young lady's hands in his, kissed her a great number of times, perhaps a greater number than was absolutely necessary, and then, still retaining one of her hands, told Mr. Winkle he was an audacious young dog, and bade him get up. This, Mr. Winkle, who had been for some seconds scratching his nose with the brim of his hat, in a penitent manner, did. Whereupon Mr. Pickwick slapped him on the back several times, and then shook hands heartily with Perker, who, not to be behindhand in the compliments of the occasion, saluted both the bride and the pretty housemaid with right good will, and, having wrung Mr. Winkle's hand most cordially, wound up his demonstrations of joy by taking snuff enough to set any half-dozen men with ordinarily constructed noses, a-sneezing for life. "Why, my dear girl," said Mr. Pickwick, "how has all this come about? Come, sit down and let me hear it all. How well she looks, doesn't she, Perker?" added Mr. Pickwick, surveying Arabella's face with a look of as much pride and exultation as if she had been his daughter. "Delightful, my dear sir," replied the little man. "If I were not a married man myself, I should be disposed to envy you, you dog." Thus expressing himself, the little lawyer gave Mr. Winkle a poke in the chest, which that gentleman reciprocated, after which they both laughed very loudly, but not so loudly as Mr. Samuel Weller, who had just relieved his feelings by kissing the pretty housemaid under cover of the cupboard door. "I can never be grateful enough to you, Sam, I am sure," said Arabella, with the sweetest smile imaginable. "I shall not forget your exertions in the garden at Clifton." "Don't say nothin' wotfer about it, ma'am," replied Sam. "I only assisted Nader, ma'am, as the doctor said to the boy's mother after he'd bled him to death." "Mary, my dear, sit down," said Mr. Pickwick, cutting short these compliments. "Now then, how long have you been married, eh?" Arabella looked bashfully at her lord and master, who replied, "Only 3 days." "Only 3 days, eh?" said Mr. Pickwick. "Why, what have you been doing these 3 months?" "Ah, to be sure," interposed Perker. "Come, account for this idleness." You see, Mr. Pickwick's only astonishment is that it wasn't all over months ago. "Why, the fact is," replied Mr. Winkle, looking at his blushing young wife, "that I could not persuade Bella to run away for a long time. And when I had persuaded her, it was a long time more before we could find an opportunity. Mary had to give a month's warning, too, before she could leave her place next door, and we couldn't possibly have done it without her assistance." "Upon my word," exclaimed Mr. Pickwick, who by this time had resumed his spectacles, and was looking from Arabella to Winkle and from Winkle to Arabella, with as much delight depicted in his countenance as warm-heartedness and kindly feeling can communicate to the human face. "Upon my word. You seem to have been very systematic in your proceedings. And is your brother acquainted with all this, my dear?" "Oh, no," replied Arabella, changing color. "Dear Mr. Pickwick, he must only know it from your lips alone. He is so violent, so prejudiced, and has been so anxious in behalf of his friend, Mr. Sawyer," added Arabella, looking down, "that I fear the consequences dreadfully." "Ah, to be sure," said Perker gravely. "You must take this matter in hand for them, my dear sir. These young men will respect you when they would listen to nobody else. You must prevent mischief, my dear sir. Hot blood, and the little man took a warning pinch and shook his head doubtfully. "You forget, my love," said Mr. Pickwick gently, "you forget that I am a prisoner." "No, indeed I do not, my dear sir," replied Arabella. "I never have forgotten it. I have never ceased to think how great your sufferings must have been in this shocking place. But I hoped that what no consideration for yourself would induce you to do, a regard to our happiness might. If my brother hears of this, first from you, I feel certain we shall be reconciled. He is my only relation in the world, Mr. Pickwick, and unless you plead for me, I fear I have lost even him. Have done wrong, very, very wrong, I know." Here poor Arabella hid her face in her handkerchief and wept bitterly. Mr. Pickwick's nature was a good deal worked upon by these same tears, but when Mrs. Winkle, drying her eyes, took to coaxing and entreating in the sweetest tones of a very sweet voice, he became particularly restless, and evidently undecided how to act, as was evinced by sundry nervous rubbings of his spectacle glasses, nose, tights, head, and gaiters. Taking advantage of these symptoms of indecision, Mr. Perker, to whom, it appeared, the young couple had driven straight that morning, urged with legal point and shrewdness that Mr. Winkle, senior, was still unacquainted with the important rise in life's flight of steps which his son had taken. That the future expectations of the said son depended entirely upon the said Winkle, Sr., continuing to regard him with undiminished feelings of affection and attachment, which it was very unlikely he would, if this great event were long kept a secret from him. That Mr. Pickwick, repairing to Bristol to seek Mr. Allen, might, with equal reason, repair to Birmingham to seek Mr. Winkle, Sr. Lastly, that Mr. Winkle, Sr., had good right and title to consider Mr. Pickwick as in some degree the guardian and adviser of his son, and that it consequently behoved that gentleman, and was indeed due to his personal character, to acquaint the aforesaid Winkle, Sr., personally, and by word of mouth, with the whole circumstances of the case, and with the share he had taken in the transaction. Mr. Tupman and Mr. Snodgrass arrived, most opportunely, in this stage of the pleadings, and as it was necessary to explain to them all that had occurred, together with the various reasons pro and con, the whole of the arguments were gone over again, after which everybody urged every argument in his own way and at his own length. And at last, Mr. Pickwick fairly argued and remonstrated out of all his resolutions, and being in imminent danger of being argued and remonstrated out of his wits, caught Arabella in his arms, and declaring that she was a very amiable creature, and that he didn't know how it was, but he had always been very fond of her from the first, said he could never find it in his heart to stand in the way of young people's happiness, and they might do with him as they pleased. Mr. Weller's first act, on hearing this concession, was to dispatch Job Trotter to the illustrious Mr. Pell, with an authority to deliver to the bearer the formal discharge which his prudent parent had had the foresight to leave in the hands of that learned gentleman, in case it should be, at any time, required on an emergency. His next proceeding was to invest his whole stock of ready money in the purchase of 25 gallons of mild porter, which he himself dispensed on the racket ground to everybody who would partake of it. This done, he hurried in divers parts of the building until he lost his voice, and then quietly relapsed into his usual collected and philosophical condition. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Mr. Pickwick took a last look at his little room, and made his way, as well as he could, through the throng of debtors who pressed eagerly forward to shake him by the hand, until he reached the lodge steps. He turned here to look about him, and his eye lightened as he did so. In all the crowd of wan, emaciated faces, he saw not one which was not happier for his sympathy and charity. "Perker," said Mr. Pickwick, beckoning one young man towards him, "this is Mr. Jingle, whom I spoke to you about." "Very good, my dear sir," replied Perker, looking hard at Jingle. "You will see me again, young man, tomorrow. I hope you may live to remember and feel deeply what I shall have to communicate, sir." Jingle bowed respectfully, trembled very much as he took Mr. Pickwick's proffered hand, and withdrew. "Job, you know, I think," said Mr. Pickwick, presenting that gentleman. "I know the rascal," replied Perker good-humoredly. "See after your friend, and be in the way tomorrow at 1. Do you hear? Now, is there anything more?" "Nothing," rejoined Mr. Pickwick. "You have delivered the little parcel I gave you for your old landlord, Sam." "I have, sir," replied Sam. "He bust out a-cryin', sir, and said you was worry generous and thoughtful, and he only wished you could have him inoculated for a gallopin' consumption, for his old friend as had lived here so long wo's dead, and he'd nowheres to look for another." Poor fellow," said Mr. Pickwick. "God bless you, my friends." As Mr. Pickwick uttered this adieu, the crowd raised a loud shout. Many among them were pressing forward to shake him by the hand again, when he drew his arm through Perker's, and hurried from the prison, far more sad and melancholy, for the moment, than when he had first entered it. Alas! How many sad and unhappy beings had he left behind? A happy evening was that for at least one party in the George and Vulture, and light and cheerful were two of the hearts that emerged from its hospitable door next morning. The owners thereof were Mr. Pickwick and Sam Weller, the former of whom was speedily deposited inside a comfortable post-coach, with a little dickey behind, in which the latter mounted with great agility. "Sir," called out Mr. Weller to his master. "Well, Sam," replied Mr. Pickwick, thrusting his head out of the window. "I wish them horses had been 3 months, and better in the fleet, sir." "Why, Sam?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. Why, sir, exclaimed Mr. Weller, rubbing his hands, how they would go if they had been. Chapter 48 relates how Mr. Pickwick, with the assistance of Samuel Weller, essayed to soften the heart of Mr. Benjamin Allen and to mollify the wrath of Mr. Robert Sawyer. Mr. Ben Allen and Mr. Bob Sawyer sat together in the little surgery behind the shop, discussing minced veal and future prospects, when the discourse, not unnaturally, turned upon the practice acquired by Bob the aforesaid, and his present chances of deriving a competent independence from the honorable profession to which he had devoted himself. Which, I think, observed Mr. Bob Sawyer, pursuing the thread of the subject which, I think, Ben, are rather dubious. What's rather dubious? Inquired Mr. Ben Allen, at the same time sharpening his intellect with a draught of beer. What's dubious? Why, the chances, responded Mr. Bob Sawyer. I forgot, said Mr. Ben Allen. The beer has reminded me that I forgot, Bob. Yes, they are dubious. It's wonderful how the poor people patronize me, said Mr. Bob Sawyer reflectively. They knock me up at all hours of the night. They take medicine to an extent which I should have conceived impossible. They put on blisters and leeches with a perseverance worthy of a better cause. They make additions to their families in a manner which is quite awful. 6 of those last-named little promissory notes, all due on the same day, Ben, and all entrusted to me. It's very gratifying, isn't it? Said Mr. Ben Allen, holding his plate for some more minced veal. Oh, very, replied Bob, only not quite so much so as the confidence of patients with a shilling or two to spare would be. This business was capitally described in the advertisement, Ben. It is a practice, a very extensive practice, and that's all. Bob, said Mr. Ben Allen, laying down his knife and fork, and fixing his eyes on the visage of his friend, Bob, I'll tell you what it is. What is it? Inquired Mr. Bob Sawyer. You must make yourself, with as little delay as possible, master of Arabella's £1,000. 3%. Consolidated bank annuities, now standing in her name in the book or books of the Governor and Company of the Bank of England, added Bob Sawyer, in legal phraseology. Exactly so, said Ben. She has it when she comes of age or marries. She wants a year of coming of age, and if you plucked up a spirit, she needn't want a month of being married. She's a very charming and delightful creature, quoth Mr. Robert Sawyer in reply, and has only one fault that I know of, Ben. It happens, unfortunately, that single blemish is a want of taste. She don't like me. It's my opinion that she don't know what she does like, said Mr. Ben Allen contemptuously. Perhaps not, remarked Mr. Bob Sawyer. But it's my opinion that she does know what she doesn't like, and that's of more importance. I wish, said Mr. Ben Allen, setting his teeth together, and speaking more like a savage warrior who fed on raw wolf's flesh which he carved with his fingers, than a peaceable young gentleman who ate minced veal with a knife and fork. I wish I knew whether any rascal really has been tampering with her, and attempting to engage her affections. I think I should assassinate him, Bob. I'd put a bullet in him if I found him out, said Mr. Sawyer, stopping in the course of a long draught of beer and looking malignantly out of the porter pot. If that didn't do his business, I'd extract it afterwards and kill him that way. Mr. Benjamin Allen gazed abstractedly on his friend for some minutes in silence, and then said, You have never proposed to her, point blank, Bob. No. Because I saw it would be of no use, replied Mr. Robert Sawyer. You shall do it before you are 24 hours older, retorted Ben with desperate calmness. She shall have you, or I'll know the reason why. I'll exert my authority. Well, said Mr. Bob Sawyer, we shall see. We shall see, my friend, replied Mr. Ben Allen fiercely. He paused for a few seconds and added in a voice broken by emotion, You have loved her from a child, my friend. You loved her when we were boys at school together, and, even then, she was wayward and slighted your young feelings. Do you recollect, with all the eagerness of a child's love, one day pressing upon her acceptance, 2 small caraway seed biscuits and 1 sweet apple, neatly folded into a circular parcel with the leaf of a copybook? I do, replied Bob Sawyer. She slighted that, I think, said Ben Allen. She did, rejoined Bob. She said I had kept the parcel so long in the pockets of my corduroys that the apple was unpleasantly warm. I remember, said Mr. Allen gloomily. Upon which we ate it ourselves, in alternate bites. Bob Sawyer intimated his recollection of the circumstance last alluded to by a melancholy frown, and the two friends remained for some time absorbed, each in his own meditations. While these observations were being exchanged between Mr. Bob Sawyer and Mr. Benjamin Allen, and while the boy in the gray livery, marveling at the unwonted prolongation of the dinner, cast an anxious look, from time to time, towards the glass door, distracted by inward misgivings regarding the amount of minced veal which would be ultimately reserved for his individual cravings. There rolled soberly on through the streets of Bristol a private fly, painted of a sad green color, drawn by a chubby sort of brown horse, and driven by a surly-looking man with his legs dressed like the legs of a groom, and his body attired in the coat of a coachman. Such appearances are common to many vehicles belonging to, and maintained by, old ladies of economic habits, and in this vehicle sat an old lady who was its mistress and proprietor. "Martin," said the old lady, calling to the surly man out of the front window. "Well," said the surly man, touching his hat to the old lady. "Mr. Sawyer S.," said the old lady. "I was going there," said the surly man. The old lady nodded the satisfaction which this proof of the surly man's foresight imparted to her feelings, and the surly man giving a smart lash to the chubby horse, they all repaired to Mr. Bob Sawyer's together. "Martin," said the old lady, when the fly stopped at the door of Mr. Robert Sawyer, late Knockamorf. "Well," said Martin, "ask the lad to step out and mind the horse." "I'm going to mind the horse myself," said Martin, laying his whip on the roof of the fly. "I can't permit it on any account," said the old lady. "Your testimony will be very important, and I must take you into the house with me. You must not stir from my side during the whole interview. Do you hear?" "I hear," replied Martin. "Well, what are you stopping for?" "Nothing," replied Martin. So saying, the surly man leisurely descended from the wheel, on which he had been poising himself on the tops of the toes of his right foot, and having summoned the boy in the gray livery, opened the coach door, flung down the steps, and thrusting in a hand enveloped in a dark wash-leather glove, pulled out the old lady with as much unconcern in his manner as if she were a bandbox. "Dear me," exclaimed the old lady. "I am so flurried, now I have got here, Martin, that I'm all in a tremble." Mr. Martin coughed behind the dark wash-leather gloves, but expressed no sympathy. So the old lady, composing herself, trotted up Mr. Bob Sawyer's steps, and Mr. Martin followed. Immediately on the old lady's entering the shop, Mr. Benjamin Allen and Mr. Bob Sawyer, who had been putting the spirit sand water out of sight, and upsetting nauseous drugs to take off the smell of the tobacco smoke, issued hastily forth in a transport of pleasure and affection. "My dear aunt," exclaimed Mr. Ben Allen, "how kind of you to look in upon us." "Mr. Sawyer, aunt? My friend Mr. Bob Sawyer, whom I have spoken to you about, regarding you know, aunt." And here Mr. Ben Allen, who was not at the moment extraordinarily sober, added the word, Arabella, in what was meant to be a whisper, but which was an especially audible and distinct tone of speech which nobody could avoid hearing, if anybody were so disposed. "My dear Benjamin," said the old lady, struggling with a great shortness of breath and trembling from head to foot, "don't be alarmed, my dear. But I think I had better speak to Mr. Sawyer alone for a moment." "Only for one moment." "Bob," said Mr. Allen, "will you take my aunt into the surgery?" "Certainly," responded Bob in a most professional voice. "Step this way, my dear ma'am." "Don't be frightened, ma'am. We shall be able to set you to rights in a very short time, I have no doubt, ma'am." "Here, my dear ma'am." Now then, with this, Mr. Bob Sawyer, having handed the old lady to a chair, shut the door, drew another chair close to her, and waited to hear detailed the symptoms of some disorder from which he saw in perspective a long train of profits and advantages. The first thing the old lady did was to shake her head a great many times and began to cry. "Nervous," said Bob Sawyer complacently. "Camphor julep and water 3 times a day, and composing draught at night." "I don't know how to begin, Mr. Sawyer," said the old lady. "It is so very painful and distressing." "You need not begin, ma'am," rejoined Mr. Bob Sawyer. I can anticipate all you would say. The head is in fault. I should be very sorry to think it was the heart, said the old lady, with a slight groan. Not the slightest danger of that, ma'am, replied Bob Sawyer. The stomach is the primary cause. Mr. Sawyer, exclaimed the old lady, starting. Not the least doubt of it, ma'am, rejoined Bob, looking wondrous wise. Medicine, in time, my dear ma'am, would have prevented it all. Mr. Sawyer, said the old lady, more flurried than before, this conduct is either great impertinence to one in my situation, sir, or it arises from your not understanding the object of my visit. If it had been in the power of medicine, or any foresight I could have used to prevent what has occurred, I should certainly have done so. I had better see my nephew at once, said the old lady, twirling her reticule indignantly and rising as she spoke. Stop a moment, ma'am, said Bob Sawyer. I'm afraid I have not understood you. What is the matter, ma'am? My niece, Mr. Sawyer, said the old lady, your friend's sister. Yes, ma'am, said Bob, all impatience. For the old lady, although much agitated, spoke with the most tantalizing deliberation, as old ladies often do. Yes, ma'am. Left my home, Mr. Sawyer, 3 days ago on a pretended visit to my sister, another aunt of hers, who keeps the large boarding school just beyond the 3rd milestone, where there is a very large laburnum tree and an oak gate, said the old lady, stopping in this place to dry her eyes. Oh, devil take the laburnum tree, ma'am, said Bob, quite forgetting his professional dignity in his anxiety. Get on a little faster, put a little more steam on, ma'am, pray. This morning, said the old lady slowly, this morning, She came back, ma'am, I suppose, said Bob with great animation. Did she come back? No, she did not, she wrote, replied the old lady. What did she say? Inquired Bob eagerly. She said, Mr. Sawyer, replied the old lady, and it is this I want to prepare Benjamin's mind for, gently and by degrees. She said that I have got the letter in my pocket, Mr. Sawyer, but my glasses are in the carriage, and I should only waste your time if I attempted to point out the passage to you without them. She said, in short, Mr. Sawyer, that she was married. What? Said, or rather shouted, Mr. Bob Sawyer. Married? Repeated the old lady. Mr. Bob Sawyer stopped to hear no more, but darting from the surgery into the outer shop, cried in a stentorian voice, Ben, my boy, she's bolted. Mr. Ben Allen, who had been slumbering behind the counter, with his head half a foot or so below his knees, no sooner heard this appalling communication than he made a precipitate rush at Mr. Martin, and twisting his hand in the neckcloth of that taciturn servitor, expressed an obliging intention of choking him where he stood. This intention, with a promptitude often the effect of desperation, he at once commenced carrying into execution with much vigor and surgical skill. Mr. Martin, who was a man of few words and possessed but little power of eloquence or persuasion, submitted to this operation with a very calm and agreeable expression of countenance for some seconds. Finding, however, that it threatened speedily to lead to a result which would place it beyond his power to claim any wages, board or otherwise, in all time to come, he muttered an inarticulate remonstrance and felled Mr. Benjamin Allen to the ground. As that gentleman had his hands entangled in his cravat, he had no alternative but to follow him to the floor. There they both lay struggling when the shop door opened, and the party was increased by the arrival of 2 most unexpected visitors, to wit, Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Samuel Weller. The impression at once produced on Mr. Weller's mind by what he saw was that Mr. Martin was hired by the establishment of Sawyer, late Nakamorph, to take strong medicine, or to go into fits and be experimentalized upon, or to swallow poison now, and then with the view of testing the efficacy of some new antidotes, or to do something or other to promote the great science of medicine and gratify the ardent spirit of inquiry burning in the bosoms of its 2 young professors. So, without presuming to interfere, Sam stood perfectly still and looked on, as if he were mightily interested in the result of the then pending experiment. Not so Mr. Pickwick. He at once threw himself on the astonished combatants with his accustomed energy and loudly called upon the bystanders to interpose. This roused Mr. Bob Sawyer, who had been hitherto quite paralyzed by the frenzy of his companion. With that gentleman's assistance, Mr. Pickwick raised Ben Allen to his feet. Mr. Martin, finding himself alone on the floor, got up and looked about him. "Mr. Allen," said Mr. Pickwick, "what is the matter, sir?" "Never mind, sir," replied Mr. Allen with haughty defiance. "What is it?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, looking at Bob Sawyer. "Is he unwell?" Before Bob could reply, Mr. Ben Allen seized Mr. Pickwick by the hand and murmured in sorrowful accents, "My sister, my dear sir, my sister." "Oh, is that all?" said Mr. Pickwick. "We shall easily arrange that matter, I hope. Your sister is safe and well, and I am here, my dear sir, too. Sorry to do anything as may cause an interruption to such worry-pleasant proceedings, as the king said when he dissolved the parliament," interposed Mr. Weller, who had been peeping through the glass door. "But there's another experiment here, sir. Here's a venerable old lady a-lion on the carpet waitin' for dissection, or galvanism, or some other rewivin' and scientific inwention." "I forgot," exclaimed Mr. Ben Allen. "It is my aunt." "Dear me," said Mr. Pickwick. "Poor lady." "Gently, Sam, gently. Strange situation for one o' the family," observed Sam Weller, hoisting the aunt into a chair. "Now to pity Sawbones, bring out the volatility." The latter observation was addressed to the boy in gray, who, having handed over the fly to the care of the street keeper, had come back to see what all the noise was about. Between the boy in gray and Mr. Bob Sawyer and Mr. Benjamin Allen, who, having frightened his aunt into a fainting fit, was affectionately solicitous for her recovery, the old lady was at length restored to consciousness. Then Mr. Ben Allen, turning with a puzzled countenance to Mr. Pickwick, asked him what he was about to say when he had been so alarmingly interrupted. "We are all friends here, I presume?" said Mr. Pickwick, clearing his voice and looking towards the man of few words with the surly countenance, who drove the fly with the chubby horse. This reminded Mr. Bob Sawyer that the boy in gray was looking on, with eyes wide open and greedy ears. The incipient chemist having been lifted up by his coat collar and dropped outside the door, Bob Sawyer assured Mr. Pickwick that he might speak without reserve. "Your sister, my dear sir," said Mr. Pickwick, turning to Benjamin Allen, "is in London, well and happy." "Her happiness is no object to me, sir," said Benjamin Allen with a flourish of the hand. "Her husband is an object to me, sir," said Bob Sawyer. "He shall be an object to me, sir, at 12 paces, and a pretty object I'll make of him, sir, a mean-spirited scoundrel." This, as it stood, was a very pretty denunciation, and magnanimous withal. But Mr. Bob Sawyer rather weakened its effect by winding up with some general observations concerning the punching of heads and knocking out of eyes, which were commonplace by comparison. "Stay, sir," said Mr. Pickwick. "Before you apply those epithets to the gentleman in question, consider, dispassionately, the extent of his fault, and above all remember that he is a friend of mine." "What?" said Mr. Bob Sawyer. "His name," cried Ben Allen. "His name?" "Mr. Nathaniel Winkle," said Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Benjamin Allen deliberately crushed his spectacles beneath the heel of his boot, and having picked up the pieces and put them into 3 separate pockets, folded his arms, bit his lips, and looked in a threatening manner at the bland features of Mr. Pickwick. "Then it's you, is it, sir, who have encouraged and brought about this match?" inquired Mr. Benjamin Allen at length. "And it's this gentleman's servant, I suppose," interrupted the old lady, "who has been skulking about my house and endeavoring to entrap my servants to conspire against their Mistress Martin." "Well," said the surly man, coming forward, "is that the young man you saw in the lane, whom you told me about this morning?" Mr. Martin, who, as it has already appeared, was a man of few words, looked at Sam Weller, nodded his head, and growled forth, "That's the man." Mr. Weller, who was never proud, gave a smile of friendly recognition as his eyes encountered those of the surly groom, and admitted in courteous terms that he had knowed him afore. "And this is the faithful creature," exclaimed Mr. Ben Allen, "whom I had nearly suffocated. Mr. Pickwick, how dare you allow your fellow to be employed in the abduction of my sister?" "I demand that you explain this matter, sir." "Explain it, sir," cried Bob Sawyer fiercely. "It's a conspiracy," said Ben Allen. "A regular plant," added Mr. Bob Sawyer. "A disgraceful imposition," observed the old lady. "Nothing but ado," remarked Martin. "Pray hear me," urged Mr. Pickwick. as Mr. Ben Allen fell into a chair that patients were bled in and gave way to his pocket handkerchief. I have rendered no assistance in this matter, beyond being present at one interview between the young people which I could not prevent, and from which I conceived my presence would remove any slight coloring of impropriety that it might otherwise have had. This is the whole share I have had in the transaction, and I had no suspicion that an immediate marriage was even contemplated. Though mind, added Mr. Pickwick, hastily checking himself mind, I do not say I should have prevented it if I had known that it was intended. You hear that, all of you, you hear that, said Mr. Benjamin Allen. I hope they do, mildly observed Mr. Pickwick, looking round, and, added that gentleman, his color mounting as he spoke, I hope they hear this, sir, also. That from what has been stated to me, sir, I assert that you were by no means justified in attempting to force your sister's inclinations as you did, and that you should rather have endeavored by your kindness and forbearance to have supplied the place of other nearer relations whom she had never known, from a child. As regards my young friend, I must beg to add that in every point of worldly advantage he is, at least, on an equal footing with yourself, if not on a much better one, and that unless I hear this question discussed with becoming temper and moderation, I decline hearing any more said upon the subject. I wish to make a worry few remarks in addition to what has been put forward by the honorable gentleman as his gist give over, said Mr. Weller, stepping forth, which is this here. A individual in company has called me a feller. That has nothing whatever to do with the matter, Sam, interposed Mr. Pickwick. Pray hold your tongue. I ain't a-goin' to say nothin' on that 'ere pint, sir, replied Sam, but merely this here. P'raps that gentleman may think as there was a priory tackment, but there warn't nothin' o' the sort, for the young lady said in the worry beginnin' o' the keepin' company that she couldn't abide him. Nobody's cut him out, and it 'ud ha been just the worry same for him if the young lady had never seen Mr. Winkle. That's what I wish to say, sir, and I hope I've now made that 'ere gentleman's mind easy. A short pause followed these consolatory remarks of Mr. Weller. Then Mr. Ben Allen, rising from his chair, protested that he would never see Arabella's face again, while Mr. Bob Sawyer, despite Sam's flattering assurance, vowed dreadful vengeance on the happy bridegroom. But just when matters were at their height, and threatening to remain so, Mr. Pickwick found a powerful assistant in the old lady, who, evidently much struck by the mode in which he had advocated her niece's cause, ventured to approach Mr. Benjamin Allen with a few comforting reflections, of which the chief were, that after all, perhaps, it was well it was no worse. The least said the soonest mended, and upon her word she did not know that it was so very bad after all. What was over couldn't be begun, and what couldn't be cured must be endured, with various other assurances of the like novel and strengthening description. To all of these, Mr. Benjamin Allen replied that he meant no disrespect to his aunt or anybody there, but if it were all the same to them and they would allow him to have his own way, he would rather have the pleasure of hating his sister till death, and after it. At length, when this determination had been announced 100 times, the old lady, suddenly bridling up and looking very majestic, wished to know what she had done that no respect was to be paid to her years or station, and that she should be obliged to beg and pray, in that way, of her own nephew, whom she remembered about 25 years before he was born, and whom she had known, personally, when he hadn't a tooth in his head. To say nothing of her presence on the first occasion of his having his hair cut, and assistance at numerous other times and ceremonies during his babyhood, of sufficient importance to found a claim upon his affection, obedience, and sympathies, forever. While the good lady was bestowing this objurgation on Mr. Ben Allen, Bob Sawyer and Mr. Pickwick had retired in close conversation to the inner room, where Mr. Sawyer was observed to apply himself several times to the mouth of a black bottle, under the influence of which, his features gradually assumed a cheerful and even jovial expression. And at last he emerged from the room, bottle in hand, and, remarking that he was very sorry to say he had been making a fool of himself, begged to propose the health and happiness of Mr. and Mrs. Winkle, whose felicity, so far from envying, he would be the first to congratulate them upon. Hearing this, Mr. Ben Allen suddenly arose from his chair, and, seizing the black bottle, drank the toast so heartily that, the liquor being strong, he became nearly as black in the face as the bottle. Finally, the black bottle went round till it was empty, and there was so much shaking of hands and interchanging of compliments that even the metal-visaged Mr. Martin condescended to smile. "And now," said Bob Sawyer, rubbing his hands, "we'll have a jolly night." "I am sorry," said Mr. Pickwick, "that I must return to my inn. I have not been accustomed to fatigue lately, and my journey has tired me exceedingly." "You'll take some tea, Mr. Pickwick," said the old lady, with irresistible sweetness. "Thank you, I would rather not," replied that gentleman. The truth is that the old lady's evidently increasing admiration was Mr. Pickwick's principal inducement for going away. He thought of Mrs. Bardell, and every glance of the old lady's eyes threw him into a cold perspiration. As Mr. Pickwick could by no means be prevailed upon to stay, it was arranged at once, on his own proposition, that Mr. Benjamin Allen should accompany him on his journey to the elder Mr. Winkle's, and that the coach should be at the door at 9 o'clock next morning. He then took his leave, and, followed by Samuel Weller, repaired to the bush. It is worthy of remark that Mr. Martin's face was horribly convulsed as he shook hands with Sam at parting, and that he gave vent to a smile and an oath simultaneously. From which tokens, it has been inferred by those who were best acquainted with that gentleman's peculiarities, that he expressed himself much pleased with Mr. Weller's society, and requested the honor of his further acquaintance. "Shall I order a private room, sir?" inquired Sam when they reached the bush. "Why no, Sam," replied Mr. Pickwick. "As I dined in the coffee-room and shall go to bed soon, it is hardly worthwhile. See who there is in the traveler's room, Sam." Mr. Weller departed on his errand, and presently returned to say that there was only a gentleman with one eye, and that he and the landlord were drinking a bowl of bishop together. "I will join them," said Mr. Pickwick. "He's a queer customer, the one-eyed one, sir," observed Mr. Weller as he led the way. "He's a gammon that landlord, he is, sir, till he don't rightly know whether he's a-standing on the soles of his boots or the crown of his hat." The individual to whom this observation referred was sitting at the upper end of the room when Mr. Pickwick entered, and was smoking a large Dutch pipe, with his eye intently fixed on the round face of the landlord, a jolly-looking old personage to whom he had recently been relating some tale of wonder, as was testified by sundry disjointed exclamations of, "Well, I wouldn't have believed it. The strangest thing I ever heard. Couldn't have supposed it possible," and other expressions of astonishment which burst spontaneously from his lips as he returned the fixed gaze of the one-eyed man. "Servant, sir," said the one-eyed man to Mr. Pickwick. "Fine night, sir." "Very much so indeed," replied Mr. Pickwick, as the waiter placed a small decanter of brandy and some hot water before him. While Mr. Pickwick was mixing his brandy and water, the one-eyed man looked round at him earnestly, from time to time, and at length said, "I think I've seen you before." "I don't recollect you," rejoined Mr. Pickwick. "I dare say not," said the one-eyed man. "You didn't know me, but I knew two friends of yours that were stopping at the Peacock at Eatanswill at the time of the election." "Oh, indeed," exclaimed Mr. Pickwick. "Yes," rejoined the one-eyed man. "I mentioned a little circumstance to them about a friend of mine of the name of Tom Smart. Perhaps you've heard them speak of it." "Often," rejoined Mr. Pickwick, smiling. "He was your uncle, I think." No, only a friend of my Uncle S," replied the one-eyed man. "He was a wonderful man, that uncle of yours, though," remarked the landlord, shaking his head. "Well, I think he was. I think I may say he was," answered the one-eyed man. "I could tell you a story about that same uncle, gentlemen, that would rather surprise you." "Could you?" said Mr. Pickwick. "Let us hear it, by all means." The one-eyed bagman ladled out a glass of negus from the bowl and drank it, smoked a long whiff out of the Dutch pipe, and then, calling to Sam Weller, who was lingering near the door, that he needn't go away unless he wanted to, because the story was no secret, fixed his eye upon the landlord S, and proceeded in the words of the next chapter.